The 31st season of The Ultimate Fighter is done and dusted in the books. Another series completed, finished last night. There will be spoilers in this episode for the series, so if you haven't watched the episode yet, the fights are going to be announced everywhere all over social media for this weekend, so I'm sure you'll find out anyway, as I always do. But yeah, let's talk about the series. As somebody who has watched pretty much every season of The Ultimate Fighter, definitely every single one since I've been a fan, and I've gone back and watched a lot of the old ones as well. There might be a couple ones that I've missed, maybe some of the first few, yeah, I don't know, a couple that I've missed, but all of the modern ones, and sometimes it's not easy viewing, let's say, but let's talk about this one, because this one was obviously a big deal with Conor coming back to coach, standing across from Michael Chandler. It was going to be a big deal, but we'll get into all of that. Let's first talk about the format, because I think this is the easiest thing to talk about, because it has not changed. I'm sure you will have seen the tweet from Sean Sheehan. I'll screenshot it and put it up, of the UFC embedded tweet, which always makes me laugh every single time those kick off. In fact, I don't know if he's reposted it yet for UFC 292, but I'm sure he will, and I'm sure it will make me laugh still. And I think you could probably do the same for The Ultimate Fighter with the episode formats in the they're just very formulaic and it doesn't change. And that was one of the big things for me with them bringing Tough back and putting it in the Apex, was whether that would change at all, and it just hasn't. Feels like every season we get a little bit less of them being in the house. I purely put this down to the fact that the athletes are way more professional than they were in the earlier seasons of The Ultimate Fighter, so there's less reality show drama going on. Still got a few, tense moments here and there, but nothing too crazy. Which is kind of just a product of MMA as a whole, where the sport is now compared to when The Ultimate Fighter started. But, it is something to mention, I think. The format hasn't changed. You just swap in different coaches, different fighters, and so let's get onto them, because they are kind of the most worthwhile talking point of the show. I guess we'll start with the coaches, and then we'll get onto the fighters that participated in the series. Let's start with Michael Chandler. I think that if you were to make a list of maybe top 10 fighters in the UFC who will make great coaches when they hang up the gloves, Michael Chandler would be on there. Just the way he carries himself. If you've watched any of his YouTube channel and things like that, he generally has quite good takes on MMA and very well thought out thoughts. And seems to do a great job of coaching those around him naturally. And yeah, I thought he was a very good coach. Obviously, he had a very good team with him to do that, so it wasn't all on Chandler's shoulders, of course. But I did think he did a really good job. It always, every time they get an American fighter on as a coach, they all kind of have that same kind of American team sport attitude of, putting your hands in the middle and all chanting on three, and that kind of I don't know. It does feel very much like a team sport, the way that Chandler approaches the fights, especially on this season. And I thought he did a good job. I thought, did it change my perception of Michael Chandler at all? Not really. I think Michael Chandler is, at this point, what you expect him to be. And that's a good thing. I think he's always, very respectful, very professional, and of course always absolutely brings it in the octagon. So it's not a bad thing at all that he was just Michael Chandler on this series. I thought that he did quite a good job in terms of the Conor hijinks that happened throughout the series. He kind of took the high ground on a lot of things, which is quite smart to do, instead of, trying to battle it out in the trenches with Conor. But he had fun as well whilst doing it, which I think is the most important thing. So yeah, Michael Chandler was a good coach. And then obviously Conor was the huge draw. It was what the series was all about. It was what all the promo was about. And I don't know if this series did a very good job of raising Conor's stock ahead of his comeback. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it didn't promote the fight, because everyone knows that when you get that popular, people want to see you lose. So whilst there are a lot of people out there, I would say people who maybe aren't as invested in the day-to-day ongoings of MMA, that can't wait to see Conor McGregor back in there and doing his thing. There's a lot of people in the MMA world specifically that aren't the biggest Conor McGregor fans, whether it's the things he posts on social media, whether it's the things he does outside of the octagon, which justifiably get a lot of criticism. And I think the side to Conor McGregor that we saw throughout this series, there were some funny Conor moments. There's always going to be some great lines in there about some of the fighters being in the UFC longer than Chandler and things like that. That you expect from him, and some cool moments of kind of seeing the fighters, briefly have moments of like, Conor McGregor just said that to me, or Conor McGregor just showed me this, or whatever. Bringing in Wonder Boy, that was a cool moment. Just to see them two characters next to each other was surreal. I'm sure it was for Wonder Boy as well. Conor's like sizing him up, but yeah, it was a good time. But Conor didn't come across brilliantly, I don't think. Of course, he didn't show up to the weigh-ins and things like that. I don't think that's a crazy big thing. You would expect most people to do it, but a person as rich and as busy as Conor McGregor, I never expected him to in the first place. That wasn't a surprise. Of course, the fact of the matter is he nearly got swept in the tournament, the first round, and in the end, spoiler as we'll get into, he only has one fighter representing his team in the finals, and that person switched to his team in the semi-finals in order to even the numbers. So his team did not do very well. We'll get onto that in a minute. And let's just go into that now, actually, because I think we've said everything about Conor. The format of the show, in terms of the fighters, not just the format in terms of how the episodes play out, but the tournament, was prospects versus veterans. Veterans looking for a second chance because they have left the UFC and want to get back in, and prospects that have never been in the UFC before. When it says prospects, a lot of them were like the same age. A lot of them had quite a few fights already, but you know what I mean. New to the UFC, new to this level of competition, perhaps. It just seemed really stacked against whoever picked the prospects. And Conor picked the prospects because he wanted to be with one of his guys, Lee Hammond, who of course trains with him at SPG Dublin. So Chandler automatically got, I think, did Chandler pick first? I can't remember, but either way, I think Chandler picked first, Conor got that, and then Conor wanted to pick Lee Hammond, so he ended up with both teams of prospects. And this was a big criticism when the lineup was announced for this series, of some of these guys that had been cut from the UFC didn't deserve to be cut from the UFC. And so, yeah, they were going to beat the prospects on paper 10 times out of 10, because if they'd gone back into smaller shows, they probably would have fought their way back to the UFC, because they were deserving of staying in the UFC in a lot of cases. And we'll go by that case by case, but it did feel really uncompetitive sometimes, where one of the prospects would have a good performance, but then just lack of experience cost them the fight, or just the other guy being too good for them at this stage in their careers. It just, yeah, I don't know. It felt like a bit of a inevitable result that whoever had the veterans would have the majority of the success, and that's not taking away from Michael Chandler, because I can say that, but no one knows what's going to happen in the fights, and he ended up picking 7 out of 8 victories up in that first round. So credit to Michael Chandler and his team, and of course all the fighters as well. I'm not saying that it was a given result, but it did feel a little bit stacked in the veterans' favours at points. Let's go into, I've got the bantamweight bracket pulled up here on Wikipedia. The first fight that you had here was Carlos Vera taking on Brad Katona. I remember that being quite a close fight. Carlos Vera, I thought, looked quite good. I expected Brad to make it to the finals of this show, and he put up a really good fight, I thought. Let's talk about Brad Katona. No, let's move on. Move on to the next fight. Trevor Wells versus Timur Valiev, another pretty good fight. Trevor Wells put up a way better performance than I expected from him, because again, Timur Valiev was one of those guys that I was like, him and Brad Katona shouldn't have been cut from the UFC in the first place, and will probably go on to fight each other in the finals. Didn't end up happening, but we'll get to it. Actually, let's move on to that now instead. Keep it simple like that. Brad obviously went on to fight Timo Valiev in the semi-finals. He won a split decision. I think that probably was the finals in a way. Like, I think either of those guys would have been the favourites to win the final, regardless of who the opponent was, of course, unless it was against themselves, because they already fought in the semis. Yeah, both deserving to be in the UFC, and I think that fight proved it. So, enough said. You had Hunter Aja versus Rico DeShulio. Of course, the one fight that Conor won right at the last minute. Knocks out Chandler's number 1 seed, Hunter Aja, and Conor runs around the cage. And really impressive performance, Rico DeShulio. I thought he looked great. And obviously, he went on to fight Cody Gibson in the semi-finals. That was the episode that aired last night. Cody Gibson defeated Mando Gutierrez with that flying knee. That was absolutely beautiful. And I thought Rico was a little bit unlucky to lose that fight because he slipped, and then from that point on, Cody just dominated him on the ground and submitted him in the first round. But again, this is what I mean about sometimes it just felt like these guys just shouldn't be competing with these guys, because the experience of Cody Gibson, I mean, obviously he's clearly a skilled grappler on the ground, some great ground and pound, and to get that submission in, but he probably shouldn't be fighting guys like Rico DeShulio at this point. And Rico shouldn't be fighting Cody Gibson. But hey, I thought Rico was fun on this series. So the final, you've got Brad Katona versus Cody Gibson. I would expect Brad Katona to win that. Like I said, I just thought him and Timo were the two best guys in this weight bracket, and both deserving of being in the UFC. And of course, Brad ended up switching to Team McGregor in the semi-finals, and bit of drama there, which felt a bit forced to me, of Brad being a diva. And it's like, well, his team are... like, his actual team are the other team. Of course he's going to want to be on that team. I don't know. It felt a bit unnecessary to me. Lightweight bracket, the first fight of the series. You had Roosevelt Roberts taking on Nate Jenneman. He finished him in, like, I don't know, was it like 10 seconds or something like that? I don't remember much about Nate Jenneman, to be honest. Oh, he was the bald guy with the beard. I do remember him. I apologise. Roosevelt Roberts, another guy that I was thinking was probably going to go on to the finals. And, yeah, he looked good. You had Aaron McKenzie versus Austin Hubbard. Austin Hubbard, another guy that people were like, he shouldn't have been cut from the UFC. He will probably go on to win this series. He did go on to beat Aaron McKenzie, and then he did go on to beat Roosevelt Roberts in a split decision that was probably the worst fight of the series. It just felt very much like that fight in PFL that all the controversy was about, where they're clearly good friends, and it felt like a sparring match, and like quite a soft sparring match at that. Yeah, not an interesting, entertaining fight, but Austin Hubbard got the win. It was pretty uneventful. I think Roosevelt could have just won it with a few more punches, just a bit more activity, but it is what it is. You had Jason Knight versus Landon Quinones. Jason Knight, of course, was going to be one of the ones that you knew was going to bring it. That might have desynced. It did, in fact, desync. I don't know why my OBS does this one time every recording, but hey, here we go. Yeah, Jason Knight was always going to be the one that people were looking forward to as like the guy to bring the best fights of the season. And the fight against Landon Quinones wasn't really that, because he just got submitted quite early on, but good performance from Jason Knight. And then you had Lee Hammond versus Kurt Holliber. Wow, the drama in this one. Lee Hammond, I thought, looked pretty good. I was excited to watch Lee this whole time building up to the fight. Obviously been hearing about him for a long time and haven't really watched too much of his fighting career so far, just been hearing about him a lot. So I was excited for this one, and then he wins the majority of the fight and then loses it in the last minute with Kurt Holliber getting a submission. Excited to see what Lee Hammond does next. I don't know whether he should get a shot in the UFC right now, but I think a Contender Series fight maybe could be interesting for him, or something like that. Kurt Holliber goes on to fight Jason Knight, another banger of the series, although I thought Kurt Holliber looked fantastic. Austin Hubbard and Roosevelt Roberts, kind of like Brad and Timo in the other weight bracket, were the two guys that I thought this is basically the final. Whoever wins this will win the show, but Kurt Holliber looks so good against Jason Knight with his striking, which I just didn't expect at all. So I really don't know who wins that, actually. Like I said, I thought Kurt looked great, so I might even be leaning slightly towards him. But that might also be just because the last time I watched Austin Hubbard fight was that fight against Roosevelt that just didn't live up at all. Overall rating of the cast of The Ultimate Fighter Season 31, pretty good. Again, I think the format of prospects versus veterans didn't do anyone any favours, really, but I am excited to see Brad Katona back in the UFC and Timur Valiev, hopefully, assuming he gets in as well. They usually have some of these guys go through anyway. I think it would be crazy to not put Timur back in. Austin Hubbard versus Kurt Holliber is a fight that I am somewhat interested in, just to see whether Kurt looks that good again. And that's kind of it. Am I excited to watch Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler? Who knows when it's going to happen, if it's going to happen. If it does happen, it's going to get a lot of controversy, and I don't need to tell you why. So it's a weird one, this ending to The Ultimate Fighter Season 31, because I don't really know what momentum either guy in the tournament finals gets from winning it, because they've all been in the UFC before. And I don't know whether we will see Michael Chandler versus Conor McGregor. I do think we will see it, but will it be the end of this year? In controversial circumstances, maybe. Weird times for Conor McGregor. And I kind of feel for Michael Chandler, because he has been an absolute professional through all of this and has had his time wasted. But hey, it is what it is. He did a great job on the show and coaching all of these guys, and bring on the finals this Saturday night at UFC 292 in Boston. That is my review of The Ultimate Fighter Season 31. What did you think of the series as a whole? Who are you picking in the finals? And I'll catch you next time.